The Bay of Biscay has long carried a reputation as one of the most unforgiving stretches of water in Europe, but in early 1943, it gained an even darker identity. Allied aircrews began calling it the Airman's Graveyard, a place where aircraft vanished so quickly and so completely that official reports often had nothing more to record than the words, "failed to return." As RAF Coastal Command intensified its operations along this perilous corridor, no one yet realized that 5 of its crews would soon disappear without a trace, leaving behind one of the most disturbing enigmas of the war. The struggle began with a strategic necessity. By 1943, German U-boats were inflicting catastrophic losses on Allied shipping in the Atlantic. To reach the open ocean, these U-boats had to travel the Bay of Biscay, a gateway between occupied France and deeper waters. Number 228 Squadron, flying short Sunderland flying boats from Pembroke Dock, and Number 53 Squadron, fielding Consolidated Liberators out of St. Eval, were among the units assigned to choke this lifeline. Their patrols were long, monotonous, and perilously exposed, 10-hour flights over featureless sea where an engine failure, a momentary loss of visibility, or a sudden enemy attack meant near certain death. Crews quickly learned that danger in Biscay came from every direction. The weather could transform without warning from clear skies to walls of rain that pinned aircraft down at low altitude. Salt spray and crosswinds gnawed at equipment. Aircraft returned with corrosion on their hulls, dents in their wing edges, and occasionally bullet holes from skirmishes they were too shaken to recount in detail. Still, the patrols had to continue. In March 1943, Coastal Command logged its highest number of Biscay sorties since the war began. A flight engineer from Number 228 Squadron described the tension in his diary. "It's the silence that gets you. Miles of ocean. Nothing moves. Then the haze shifts or the clouds thin and suddenly there's a dot on the water or a shadow in the sky, and before you understand what you're seeing, guns open up." For many crews, that sensation of abruptly switching from peace to chaos defined the entire Biscay experience. The Luftwaffe was quick to adapt to the Allied push. Kampfgeschwader 40, flying the long-range Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor, began patrolling the same waters. Fast, high-flying Ju-88s supported them, diving on isolated Sunderlands and Liberators with startling precision. These fighters operated with growing confidence, coordinating attacks from above and below cloud formations, using the Biscay's shifting visibility to ambush aircraft that had nowhere to hide. Yet enemy aircraft were only part of the story. Mechanical strain became a silent predator. Coastal Command pushed its aircraft to the limits, running engines hard, flying low over rough seas, operating in salt-heavy air that corroded even the best-maintained machines. Maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep aircraft airworthy. Still, pilots often remarked that they could hear the airplane tiring, as if the engines themselves felt the pressure of the campaign. By April, several aircraft had already failed to return from patrols over Biscay. Most were attributed to enemy action, though few witnesses ever confirmed the actual engagements. The truth was that the sea swallowed wreckage quickly, and bodies even faster. The absence of debris was rarely surprising. What troubled intelligence officers was the number of losses that occurred without distress calls, sudden disappearances in broad daylight, in areas not known for heavy enemy presence. A Coastal Command operations summary from late April hinted at growing unease, several aircraft missing. Weather conditions variable. Enemy activity present but inconsistent with reported loss locations. In other words, the pattern didn't add up. Some losses occurred where enemy aircraft were unlikely to be operating. Others happened just minutes after routine position reports. At least one Sunderland vanished shortly after voicing minor engine trouble, hardly enough to doom an entire airframe so quickly unless something else had intervened. Modern aviation historians suggest a mix of possibilities: structural fatigue, faulty altimeters in dense haze, violent downdrafts, or misjudged altitude over wave crests that could reach surprising heights during Biscay storms. But these explanations came decades later. In 1943, no one had enough evidence to form a clear picture, and the missing crew files grew thicker each month. As the spring wore on, more flights entered Biscay airspace. More crews failed to return. Squadron commanders felt the pressure deeply, knowing their men depended on them for clarity and strategy at a time when neither seemed easy to deliver. Patrols continued nonetheless because they had to. The war at sea demanded it. And beneath every new sortie briefed, one troubling question began to take shape. Why were so many aircraft disappearing so cleanly, so quickly, and in areas where they shouldn't have been vulnerable? That question would only deepen in the months to come, as the first of the 5 most disturbing disappearances unfolded. setting the stage for one of WWII's most unsettling wartime mysteries. By the spring of 1943, the Bay of Biscay had transformed from a strategic transit route into one of the most heavily patrolled air-sea battlegrounds of the entire war. With Germany's U-boat fleet intensifying its campaign against Allied shipping, Coastal Command was under mounting pressure to widen its reconnaissance sweeps. These missions extended deep into waters where enemy air superiority was still dangerously strong. It was during this period of heightened operations that the first unsettling pattern of disappearances emerged: aircraft vanishing without distress calls, without sightings and without answers. The struggle for control of the Biscay corridor hinged on long, punishing patrols flown by aircraft like the consolidated B-24 Liberator, the Lockheed Hudson, and the iconic Short Sunderland. Each aircraft was loaded with fuel, depth charges, machine ammunition, and occasionally Lee light search equipment for night operations. Crews were briefed to expect 10-hour flights with minimal navigational landmarks. Even seasoned pilots described the sensation of being suspended over an empty, indifferent world of water and cloud, forever mindful that a single engine failure or navigational error could put them beyond rescue range. Operational demands pushed these crews to the brink. Coastal Command headquarters at Northwood insisted on deeper penetration into contested waters as signals intelligence from Bletchley Park revealed increased U-boat refit activity at Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and La Rochelle. The goal was simple: intercept U-boats before they reached the sanctuary of fortified French ports. But to accomplish that, aircrews had to fly routes that essentially advertised their presence to German listening posts and radar installations. Every patrol risked detection, and every detection risked combat. One of the earliest disappearances occurred in late April 1943. A Liberator from No. 53 Squadron left RAF Saint-Eval for a standard anti-submarine patrol. The aircraft's last transmission was a routine position report: no mention of enemy aircraft, no mechanical concerns, nothing unusual at all. When it failed to return, search efforts found no wreckage, no oil slicks, not even a stray life raft. German records later reviewed after the war listed no shoot-downs in that sector that day. The loss was recorded simply as missing. For the families and for the squadron, that word carried a terrible weight. Aircrews began to voice concerns. Pilots noted that Luftwaffe patrols seemed to materialize from nowhere, sometimes diving out of cloud banks with startling precision. Navigators complained that Biscay's weather systems were becoming more unpredictable, with sudden banks of fog rising off the water like walls. One navigator from No. 10 Squadron RAF, operating under Coastal Command in the region, wrote home that the skies felt alive with blind spots you don't see until you're in them. His letter would later be quoted in squadron briefings as a reminder of the hazards crews faced, even before the enemy appeared. Yet despite the growing awareness of danger, something still didn't make sense. In several cases, aircraft vanished where Luftwaffe patrol density was known to be light. Some disappeared during clear weather. A few vanished after reporting sightings of minor, non-threatening objects, like drifting debris, calm seas, or distant wakes. Commanding officers tried to assemble explanations. They blamed fuel miscalculations, structural stress on overburdened airframes, navigational drift, or sudden combat. But none of those fully accounted for the absence of debris or the lack of German combat reports. A revealing internal memo from Coastal Command's analysis section in May noted, "Enemy activity inconsistent with operational losses. Recommend further review of mechanical reliability data." It was a cautious phrasing, but one that hinted at deeper concern. Liberators were famously temperamental, especially when flying heavy and low. Sunderlands, though robust, could suffer catastrophic damage if they struck Biscay's unpredictable swell patterns during emergency maneuvers. And both aircraft were pushed to operational limits daily. But even mechanical failure had limitations as an explanation. Multiple aircraft were lost in quick succession under similar circumstances, routine patrols cut short by silence. Flying officers frustratingly admitted that they had little actionable intelligence. No survivors. No wrecks. No enemy confirmations. And no telling whether these disappearances represented random misfortune or a developing pattern. As spring turned into early summer, the pressure to maintain control of Biscay only intensified. Patrol lines widened. Aircraft went farther out. And aircrews could not help noticing an unsettling detail. The missing flights were no longer scattered anomalies, they were beginning to form clusters. One intelligence officer, reviewing the patrol logs late in May, drew a set of pencil circles on the navigation chart. Each circle marked a spot where an aircraft had vanished in the past 6 weeks. The The circles formed a loose chain down the western approaches, too aligned to be random. His note in the margin read simply, "Repeat losses. Review urgently." It was a warning that would go unheeded. And with the summer of 1943 looming, Coastal Command was about to face a series of disappearances far more troubling, incidents that would define the legend of Biscay's missing RAF crews for decades to come. By mid-1943, RAF analysts began noticing a troubling consistency. Aircraft were vanishing in areas that overlapped with known Luftwaffe patrol corridors. The Bay of Biscay had effectively become a shared hunting ground, Allied squadrons searching for U-boats, German units searching for the Allied patrols. At the center of this deadly overlap operated Kampfgeschwader 40, flying the formidable FW-200 Condor, and Zerstörergeschwader units equipped with the fast, versatile Ju-88. Their presence was not new, but the precision of their interceptions was beginning to raise questions. The struggle intensified in late June, when survivors from several engagements described a distinct change in enemy tactics. Rather than attacking from long range as Condors often did, Luftwaffe patrols were now coordinating multi-angle assaults. Ju-88s, operating from bases at Bordeaux-Marignac, would rise beneath cloud cover and strike first. Condors, meanwhile, loitered at high altitude, observing the fight and moving in when Allied aircraft were forced low or became damaged. These coordinated engagements suggested improved radar coordination or better intelligence on Allied patrol routes. A pilot from No. 10 Squadron RCF, flying a Liberator out of Saint-Ival, recalled in his post-mission report, "They came down on us like hawks. One moment clear skies, next moment black silhouettes dropping from cloud edges. It felt too sudden, too accurate." His crew barely survived the attack, limping back with 2 engines failing, a wounded gunner, and more than 300 bullet holes in their fuselage. This testimony reinforced a disturbing suspicion within Coastal Command. The enemy seemed to know where the patrols would be before Allied aircraft even arrived. Still, despite the rising number of encounters, inconsistencies remained. Several missing aircraft vanished in zones where Condor operations were historically rare. Intelligence crosschecks after the war revealed that German units logged no victories that matched the times or locations of some RAF losses. That discrepancy pushed some analysts to consider alternate explanations. Heavy downdrafts, sudden fog banks, navigational drift, or catastrophic structural failures were all discussed, yet none fully aligned with the frequency or precision of the disappearances. One of the most haunting cases occurred on July 8, 1943, when a Sunderland from No. 228 Squadron failed to return from a routine morning patrol. The crew had reported minor turbulence but nothing more. The last radio message was calm, a simple position update over the western approaches. When the aircraft did not return, search and rescue units were dispatched immediately. An RAF Hudson spotted a faint oil slick but no debris. German records showed no engagements in that area at that hour. The sea had swallowed the aircraft whole. A note preserved in the squadron's operations book captured the mood that day: unsettling loss. No enemy activity reported. Assessment inconclusive. The entry offered no clarity, only acknowledgement that something was deeply wrong. In subsequent weeks, more Sunderlands and Liberators faced near misses with German fighters. Surviving crews began describing an almost predatory enemy behavior. Attacks launched from blind angles, assaults coordinated between fighters and Condors, and engagements timed perfectly to exploit aircraft turning points or altitude changes. Some pilots wondered aloud if their patrol routes had been compromised. Others blamed worsening weather for masking enemy aircraft until it was too late. Weather records from the period confirmed that Biscay experienced several unusual pressure systems that summer: low-lying cloud banks, sudden fog bursts, and sharp wind shears. Meteorologists later suggested that these shifting conditions created radar shadows, areas where Allied detection equipment functioned poorly and where Luftwaffe fighters could hide until Allied aircraft passed overhead. The idea was compelling, but it did not explain the lack of German combat claims for certain disappearances. A deeper mystery emerged when analysts compared patrol times, weather data, and German logs. Patterns of visibility, enemy presence, and wind direction often aligned predictably. Yet the disappearances did not. Some aircraft vanished in perfect weather. Others disappeared during quiet intervals between known enemy sorties. A few were lost just minutes after radioing calm, routine updates, a detail that disturbed intelligence officers who knew that even under attack, crews were trained to broadcast distress signals whenever possible. In one internal intelligence summary, an officer wrote, "Some losses consistent with enemy action, others inconsistent." requires reassessment of additional factors. The phrasing was careful, bureaucratic, and deliberately vague, betraying a growing anxiety beneath the surface. Intelligence divisions feared acknowledging that they did not understand what was happening. By late July, the tension within Coastal Command was palpable. Crews briefed for Biscay sorties listened more intently to weather updates, enemy intelligence, and radio procedures. Commanders maintained a confident tone, but the men could sense the pressure behind the facade. Too many aircraft had vanished. Too few answers existed. And the summer patrols were far from over. The disappearances had begun to form a pattern, one that hinted at something more complex than simple enemy action or weather misfortune. In the coming weeks, the Bay of Biscay would claim another RAF crew, vanishing in circumstances even more perplexing than those before it, setting the stage for the most haunting chapter of the entire sequence of losses. In July 1943, the Bay of Biscay was approaching its deadliest period for RAF Coastal Command. Patrol logs were filling with red ink entries, missing aircraft, late returns, and reports of forced engagements, but nothing prepared the squadrons for the disappearance of an entire Liberator crew from No. 224 Squadron. Their loss became one of the most disturbing cases of the Biscay campaign, a vanishing that left behind a fragmentary radio call, a patch of fuel on the water, and questions that investigators could never fully answer. The flight in question departed RAF WWII on the morning of July 21, 1943. Designated O/224, it was a standard anti-submarine patrol, tasked to investigate suspected U-boat activity southwest of Brest. The crew was experienced, the aircraft well-maintained, and the weather, by Biscay standards, remarkably stable. Light cloud cover at 4,000 feet, calm seas, and a steady westerly wind. Nothing in the briefing suggested danger beyond the usual threats: Condors, Ju-88s, or the ever-shifting weather systems that could trap aircraft at low altitude. Midway through the patrol, the crew transmitted a routine sighting report: surface contact. Single vessel. Attempting identification. The message was calm, professional, unhurried. According to intercept logs at Coastal Command, the tone carried no trace of alarm. Analysts believed the crew had spotted a U-boat caught on the surface, likely recharging batteries or transferring personnel, an ideal target for a Liberator. The struggle began the moment that message was logged. When O/224 failed to send follow-up signals, analysts assumed the crew was descending for an attack run. Procedure called for a rapid dive, throttles back, and a low pass to confirm the submarine's identity before releasing depth charges. Such maneuvers were high risk. Even a well-coordinated attack could bring the aircraft dangerously close to the U-boat's anti-aircraft guns. German submarines in 1943 were no longer defenseless. Many were equipped with twin 20mm or even 37mm flak mounts. An unlucky burst could cripple an aircraft instantly. Hours passed. O/224 did not return to radio contact. No distress call. No mayday. No survival beacons. Coastal Command dispatched immediate search operations. A Hudson from No. 233 Squadron sighted what appeared to be a faint slick of fuel roughly 25 miles west of the reported contact point. But the discovery raised more questions than answers. The slick was small, too small to represent a full Liberator fuel tank rupture, and no wreckage accompanied it. No life rafts. No debris. Not even floating paper maps or seat cushions, which often survived crashes long enough for recovery teams to spot them. As news reached WWII, commanders began piecing together potential scenarios. A diary entry from one of O/224's fellow pilots captured the mood. They saw something. They went after it. And then nothing. No smoke, no debris, no confirmation of a fight. Just silence. The reveal came with the intelligence review that followed. German U-boat logs recovered after the war showed no corresponding attack in that area on that date. No submarine reported engaging an aircraft. No submarine reported being attacked. And notably, no U-boat disappeared there either. If O/224 had attempted an attack run, it left absolutely no mark on the enemy. That left investigators with a troubling contradiction. The RAF crew reported sighting a vessel, but no German record confirmed a submarine presence. Analysts considered alternative possibilities. Could the crew have sighted a harmless fishing vessel? A decoy? A drifting object partially submerged? Such misidentifications were rare but not impossible. Another theory, discussed quietly, never formally endorsed, was that the Liberator had descended too aggressively during its identification run. If misjudged by even a few feet, the aircraft could have struck an unexpected swell. At low altitude, a sudden wave crest could tear off landing gear or crack a fuselage. A catastrophic structural failure might explain the sudden loss of contact, but investigators struggled to reconcile that with the absence of debris. Weather data from that day later revealed a narrow band of low-altitude haze forming unexpectedly along the patrol line. Meteorologists suggested the haze could have masked the horizon, making altitude judgment during descent more treacherous. A pilot from 224 Squadron interviewed years later remarked, "Biscay plays tricks. It smooths the sea until sky and water look the same. One wrong glance at the altimeter, and you're gone before you have time to call it in." But even these explanations felt incomplete. German radar logs from Brittany showed no Allied aircraft entering distress altitude during that window. No German fighters were airborne in that sector at the time. And most significantly, post-war interviews with U-boat commanders confirmed that none of their vessels engaged an aircraft that day. The disappearance of O/224 became a symbol of growing unease within Coastal Command. A loss without enemy confirmation, without wreckage, without survivors, occurring during a situation where the crew should have had minutes, even seconds, to transmit alarm. Analysts accepted that the Liberator had been lost to enemy action, but privately many remained unconvinced. The case ended with an intelligence summary that captured the uncertainty perfectly: cause undetermined, enemy presence not substantiated, further review required. It was the fourth disappearance that summer, and it would not be the last. Ahead lay two more vanishings, each more unsettling than the last, fueling what would become one of the most chilling patterns of unexplained losses in RAF Coastal Command history. By late summer 1943, a sense of unease had settled over RAF Coastal Command. The disappearance of O/224 still hung heavily in squadron briefings, yet the pace of operations showed no sign of slowing. German U-boats continued to surge through the Biscay approaches, and Allied convoys depended on constant aerial coverage. But as August began, something far more disturbing emerged, a pattern of losses that traced almost perfectly along a single flight corridor. Two Sunderlands from different squadrons and flying days apart vanished nearly on the same line of longitude, both after reporting rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. The first of these disappearances involved a Sunderland from No. 461 Squadron RAF operating out of Castle Archdale. Designated U/461, the flying boat departed for a broad sweep along the western approaches on August 4, 1943. Conditions at departure were manageable: intermittent cloud layers, visibility around 5 miles, and a moderate wind from the southwest. Nothing that would raise alarms for a crew accustomed to the chaotic weather systems that defined Biscay. 2 hours into the patrol, U/461 transmitted a brief weather update, wind strengthening, visibility dropping, and then continued on its assigned course. The message did not carry urgency. It reflected routine adjustments crews often made when navigating shifting skies. But within 25 minutes, the aircraft vanished from radio contact. A Catalina rescue aircraft dispatched from Loch Earn later reported bands of thick radiation fog forming unexpectedly across the patrol line, reducing visibility to mere yards. No debris was found. This loss rattled crews, but many chalked it up to severe weather, a tragic but conceivable explanation. That confidence evaporated 5 days later, when another Sunderland, this time from No. 228 Squadron, disappeared under strikingly similar circumstances. Designated M/228, the second aircraft took off from Pembroke Dock for a dusk patrol on August 9. The route overlapped almost exactly with that flown by U/461. Again, the weather began favorably. Again, conditions deteriorated suddenly mid-flight. And again, the crew reported visibility issues shortly before going silent. A pilot from 228 Squadron later recounted the growing anxiety: "Two Sunderlands don't vanish in the same place for the same reasons in less than a week." Something was happening on that line. This revelation forced Coastal Command analysts to scrutinize their data more closely. The Bay of Biscay was known for violent, fast-moving Atlantic fronts, but the near-identical circumstances of the two disappearances, same altitude band, same approximate position, same sudden haze, raised questions. Meteorological teams reviewed pressure readings and atmospheric charts from the period. Their findings were unsettling. A narrow convergence zone had developed along that corridor, producing microbursts and localized downdrafts strong enough to drag an aircraft toward the sea with little warning. These phenomena, though understood in modern meteorology, were poorly documented at the time. An internal weather assessment, written in cautious RAF prose, noted likelihood of severe localized vertical air movement. Possible hazard to low-flying aircraft. Limited evidence available. The crews, however, had their own theories. Rumors began circulating of Luftwaffe activity in the same corridor, reports of Ju-88 fighters using the haze to mask their approach, emerging within seconds of gun range. Several airmen described seeing silhouettes vanish into cloud banks with unnatural precision. Others suggested that German signals intelligence had found a way to anticipate Allied patrol lines, allowing fighters to wait in advantageous positions. Yet Luftwaffe combat logs for those dates recorded no confirmed engagements in the area. And unlike earlier disappearances, no surviving crews claimed to have seen enemy aircraft near the missing Sunderlands. One navigator from 461 Squadron wrote in his diary, "We used to fear the condors. Now we fear the weather. Or what we don't understand about it." His words reflected a growing psychological shift. Enemy aircraft were dangerous, but at least they were visible, tangible, predictable. The losses of U/461 and M/228 felt different, like sudden erasures from the map, without noise, without witnesses, and without explanation. The investigative reveal came from an unexpected source, a French resistance intelligence report smuggled out of Brittany in late August. The report suggested increased German installation activity along the western coast, particularly radar testing sites near Lorient and Pointe du Raz. Analysts speculated whether experimental radar interference could be affecting Allied onboard navigation equipment, disorienting crews in low-visibility conditions. It was an unproven hypothesis, and post-war studies offered no definitive evidence that such interference caused aircraft losses. But the idea lodged itself firmly in the minds of coastal command strategists. Operational planners attempted to adjust routes. Patrol lines were shifted slightly west. Aircraft were ordered to fly higher when possible and to maintain stricter radio check-ins during deteriorating weather. But even these measures did little to calm the growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the Biscay theater. For the families of the missing, the reports felt painfully thin. Weather-related loss appeared too often, too conveniently, in the absence of wreckage or eyewitness accounts. For the surviving crews, the disappearances served as a constant reminder that Biscay could not simply be outflown or outplanned. It was a battlefield shaped not only by enemy action but by environmental forces that remained poorly understood. With 2 more crews added to the list of missing, the pressure on coastal command intensified. 5 mysterious disappearances in just a few months, and still no consistent explanation. And yet, the most unsettling case of all still lay ahead. One final vanishing that would cement the Bay of Biscay's reputation as a place where even experienced crews, flying well-maintained aircraft, could simply cease to exist. By the end of 1943, the Bay of Biscay had cemented itself in RAF culture as a place where logic seemed to falter. Crews understood danger. They understood enemy fighters, U-boat flak, storms, and mechanical failure. But what they could not understand, what no one could, was the pattern of aircraft simply vanishing. 5 crews were already gone, erased without wreckage or confirmation. And then, in October, the final disappearance struck Coastal Command with a force that shook morale across multiple stations. It was the loss that forced everyone from pilots to intelligence officers to confront a chilling truth. The Bay of Biscay held secrets no amount of training could overcome. The aircraft was a consolidated liberator from No. 53 Squadron, designated F/53. It departed RAF Saint-Ival early on the morning of October 11, 1943 for what should have been a routine east-west grid sweep. Conditions were marginal but manageable. Scattered low cloud, moderate headwinds, and breaking sunlight filtering through layers of overcast sky. Compared to the storms of August, this patrol almost seemed peaceful. The hook came only 90 minutes into the flight. Visibility falling. Adjusting altitude was the crew's final normal transmission. It was followed 30 seconds later by a short message, sighted wake. Investigating. This was standard procedure. Crews were trained to identify suspicious wakes. U-boats often attempted to run on the surface when Allied aircraft were not expected in the area. Yet what made F/53's message unnerving was its tone, described by the radio operator at Saint-Ival as abrupt but not alarmed, like they'd spotted something odd, but not threatening. That was at 0917 hours. No further transmissions followed. The struggle began immediately. Attempts to hail the Liberator went unanswered. A Hudson on nearby patrol attempted to divert to the last known coordinates but encountered unusual weather. Rapidly descending fog formations, whip-like crosswinds at low altitude, and what the pilot described as unexpected darkness beneath the cloud base. Forced to abort the search, the Hudson returned with no sightings of debris, no lifeboats, no oil slicks, nothing. 2 hours later, a Catalina rescue flying boat launched from Northern Ireland reached the search zone. They found similar conditions, bands of fog drifting across the water like curtains, opening and closing with disorienting speed. No wreckage was spotted. No radio signals were detected from emergency beacons. For the 4th time that year, the sea offered no clues. An insight came during the post-mission briefing. The Hudson pilot mentioned what he believed to be a faint echo on his radar, something that appeared briefly, then vanished. It was too quick to classify, but he noted the possibility of a surface contact disappearing beneath the water. Analysts attempted to cross-check this with Kriegsmarine U-boat logs later obtained after the war. None matched the time or position. If F-53 had attempted to investigate a wake, it either belonged to a vessel that evaded all wartime documentation or represented something more mundane that was mistaken for a submarine track. But this uncertainty only deepened the mystery. One of Coastal Command's senior intelligence officers wrote in his assessment, "This case bears resemblance to prior losses: sudden fog, isolated radar returns, absence of enemy confirmation, loss of aircraft in consistent corridor." The wording was cautious but pointed. Investigators were beginning to accept that these disappearances might share a common factor, one they still could not identify. The reveal came when analysts overlaid all 5 disappearance locations onto a single chart. A faint but undeniable pattern emerged. The losses formed a loose arc, tracing the boundary where cold Atlantic air met warmer currents pushing north from the bay. Meteorologists theorized that this convergence zone could produce sudden microclimates, pockets of rapid downdraft, pressure instability, and disorienting visibility shifts. For low-flying aircraft, such conditions could mimic the effects of spatial disorientation, mechanical failure, or even sudden altitude collapse. Yet even this theory felt incomplete. How could 5 experienced crews, all trained for storm flying, all operating in aircraft capable of withstanding heavy seas and tough weather, fall victim to the same invisible threat? And why had no wreckage ever been found? Crews began whispering their own ideas. Some blamed improved German radar, paired with fighter attacks timed so precisely that crews had no chance to send distress calls. Others believed environmental conditions were masking debris, pulling aircraft underwater before fuel or materials could rise to the surface. A few veterans, pragmatic, hardened men, simply admitted they did not know. One veteran of 53 Squadron said years later, "You can prepare for the enemy. You can prepare for storms. But Biscay doesn't behave. It swallows what it wants." The application to modern aviation studies has been subtle but lasting. Meteorologists and historians now point to the Bay of Biscay as an example of how complex ocean-air interactions can create localized dangers invisible to early 20th century equipment. The RAF losses have been referenced in research on downdrafts, false horizons, and microburst-like conditions over water. These theories offer plausible explanations but still no certainty. The close of 1943 saw the official inquiries filed away, stamped with phrases familiar to anyone who has studied wartime aviation: cause unknown, lost to enemy action unconfirmed, no further data available. But for the families, the squadrons, and the historians who revisit these cases, the mystery lingers. 5 RAF crews. No wreckage. No survivors. No definitive enemy claims. 5 disappearances that occurred not on the fringes of the war, but at the heart of one of its most studied theaters. And so the Bay of Biscay remains what it was in 1943, a place of shifting winds, hidden dangers, and unresolved questions. A place where the war left scars that time, investigation, and research have yet to fully explain. A place where 5 crews flew into the mist and never returned.